Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I swear I didn't. But the walls in the south hallway of the 21st floor were thinner than you'd expect for a company that just signed a $950 million deal. It was supposed to be a quick stop. I'd forgotten my speech notes, my own damn acceptance speech, for the award ceremony scheduled in less than an hour. I had walked past the executive lounge, and that's when I heard my name. I froze mid-step. "Bella handled the merger well," said a voice I recognized instantly. "Carter, our COO. She'll be the star of the ceremony. Then we transition her out. Smooth, classy." I didn't breathe, not even a twitch. Another voice chimed in. My boss, Sabrina. "She won't see it coming. Give her the trophy, a standing ovation, and then thank her for her service. By Monday, she's out of the org chart. PR will spin it as a strategic departure." The air punched out of my lungs. Sabrina. The same woman I stayed late to help prep for her big management interview 3 years ago. The same woman who once cried to me over cocktails about imposter syndrome and how she wouldn't have gotten her promotion without my mentoring. And now she was orchestrating my fall. I backed away slowly, barely blinking, my heels clicking against the polished tile as I returned to my desk, retrieved my folder, and pasted on the smile I was known for. The one that said, "I'm okay, I belong here, I trust you." But inside, something cracked, and something else hardened. They wanted to get rid of me with flowers and applause. Elegantly, like a farewell note for a chess piece being sacrificed in a high-stakes game. That was the moment I stopped believing in loyalty. Not theirs. Not corporate loyalty, and not the kind you give to people who don't think twice before cutting your name from the roster. I stood in front of the mirror in the restroom, adjusting my navy blazer, the same one I wore the day I landed our largest international account. That account had just closed. I was the lead strategist, the closer, the reason we just inked a near-billion-dollar deal. And yet, they were going to hand me a Crystal Award tonight and push me off the cliff tomorrow. I walked into that ceremony with my head high. My name was called. I stepped onto the stage. Flashbulbs popped. The crowd applauded. Carter handed me the award. Sabrina gave me a tight-lipped smile that didn't touch her eyes. I smiled wider. Then I leaned into the mic. "Thank you," I said. "To everyone at Arcadia Global who believed in this deal, thank you. I'm honored to have led this project. I wish the company continued success in everything that comes next." It was subtle, polished, untraceable, unless you knew what to look for. My team clapped. Some of them teared up. Sabrina looked relieved. They thought I hadn't heard, that I didn't know. But I did. And that night, after the lights dimmed and the flowers wilted, the system crashed. The $950 million vanished. And no one, not Carter, not Sabrina, not a single person in the room, had any idea just how close their illusion of control was to falling apart. Because I had stopped believing. And that changed everything. The next morning, the office was vibrating with the kind of tension that doesn't come from caffeine or deadline stress. It was the kind that lingers just before a storm hits. Emails pinged. Slack channels went silent. People walked faster than usual, eyes forward, avoiding small talk. I arrived early, like always, expecting nothing more than awkward glances and the usual performative civility. But then, at 9:08 a.m., the call came. The deal. The $950 million merger with Svanta, our biggest partner to date. Confirmed. There was only one condition. One stipulation written not in legal jargon, but delivered bluntly by their CEO during the final confirmation call. The project must be led by Isabella Clarke. Otherwise, the agreement is void. The room fell into a stunned silence. I wasn't on the call. I heard about it 30 minutes later when Sabrina's assistant whispered it to a colleague outside the conference room. The words echoed in my mind like a shot in a cathedral. Only me. It was a win so absolute it should have felt like triumph. But it didn't. I expected some reaction, gratitude, celebration, At the very least, a smile. Instead, when Sabrina emerged from the meeting, her expression was flat, almost pale. Carter trailed behind her, his jaw tense, eyes narrowed. They didn't say a word to me. No congratulations, no handshake, nothing. I was radioactive now, too visible, too critical, too central. That afternoon, an internal memo went out announcing the finalization of the Svanta partnership. My name was not mentioned, not once. Instead, phrases like executive team alignment and organizational excellence were repeated like protective mantras. By 3 p.m., I understood what no one wanted to say aloud. I had become a liability, not because I failed, but because I succeeded too well. Because a billion-dollar company just told my bosses that they trusted me more than them. Sabrina avoided me for the rest of the day. When we crossed paths in the hallway, she glanced away like I'd just reminded her of something she couldn't afford to face. Carter stood behind a glass wall in his office, watching. Not moving. Just watching. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the project roadmap. On paper, I was still the lead. But the air had shifted. The looks, the silence, the subtle reassignments creeping in around the edges. Meetings scheduled without me. Clients contacted through other channels. They couldn't remove me, but they could isolate me. I sat in my office as the sun dipped behind the skyline, casting long shadows across the floor. I thought about how many times I'd been told that success would protect me, that if I just worked hard enough, delivered enough, sacrificed enough, I'd be safe. But that was a lie. Success didn't shield you in a place like this. It made you a threat. It turned you into something the system couldn't control. And I knew, I felt it deep in my gut, that whatever came next, it wouldn't be about performance. It would be about power. And they were already planning their next move. That night, I didn't go straight home. I drove past my apartment and parked in the lot of a small 24-hour diner, the kind with flickering neon signs and a waitress who always calls you Han. I sat in the car, hands on the steering wheel, staring out at nothing. I was done being blindsided. If they were going to write me off, erase me, then I needed to be ready. Not just with a resume and a new LinkedIn title, but with something real. Something that couldn't be buried in a boardroom memo. That's when I remembered the old laptop in the back of my closet. I hadn't touched it in years. It ran hot, the keys were sticky from some forgotten spill, and the screen had a line of dead pixels across the bottom. But it wasn't connected to any of Elixis's internal systems. It was invisible, untouched, safe. By midnight, I had it booted up and running. That's when Gulen was born. Gulen wasn't just a pet project or a backup. It was my own ecosystem, a cleaner, more efficient, more ethical version of the architecture I'd spent years building inside Elixis. But this time, it was mine. No filters, no gatekeepers, no credit thieves. I started by recreating the foundation, my original predictive modules, the security layers, the resource balancing engine that had quietly saved the company millions. And then I did something I'd never done before. I built a hidden audit trail. Every line of code was encrypted and tagged, every access point logged. Any attempt to duplicate, edit, or reroute the system would trigger a silent alert and create a forensic snapshot of the perpetrator's digital fingerprint. Gulen was more than a platform. It was a trap. And the bait? My own brilliance, the kind they couldn't help but covet. By Friday, the first signs of betrayal arrived. Sabrina forwarded a request for access to my project folders. She CC'd Carter and used language like backup documentation and continuity planning. I smiled. Classic. They were trying to prep for my absence while pretending it was just good process. I didn't deny the request. I didn't push back. I played along, smiled, nodded in meetings, shared sanitized versions of my work, the kind with just enough polish to pass inspection but no substance beneath the surface. That same afternoon, I noticed a spike in server activity tied to Sabrina's credentials. She was copying files, not just mine, but backup logs, architecture blueprints, anything with my digital signature. I let her. Gulen tracked it all. Every keystroke, every download, every attempt to rebrand my work as theirs. And still, I said nothing. Because silence, I'd learned, was a blade. And I was just beginning to sharpen mine. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been too obvious, too easy to fight. No, the unraveling came in slow, deliberate increments, like 1,000 tiny cuts, the kind that don't bleed until it's too late. It started with the calendar invites, or rather, the ones I stopped receiving. Weekly strategy sessions, the very meetings I used to lead, quietly disappeared from my schedule. When I asked Sabrina about it, she smiled with faux concern and said, "Oh, must have been an oversight. I'll make sure you're looped in next time." I never was. Then came the restructuring of training programs. Elixis launched a new initiative to future-proof talent, complete with private workshops, access to emerging tech modules, and leadership development seminars. My name wasn't on the list. When I brought it up to HR, they responded with a polite shrug. "You're in the technical support branch now. Strategist resources are allocated differently." Just like that, a new category, a new label. I'd gone from lead architect to back-end technician. They never officially demoted me, but they didn't need to. I was seated at the far end of conference tables now, always near the exit, never next to clients. I was introduced as part of our technical team, while Carter and Sabrina took turns reciting lines I'd written the night before. And when I spoke, if I was even acknowledged, it was with thin smiles and phrases like, "Let's circle back to that later," or "Appreciate your input, but we'll need a more executive-level perspective." Executive level. As if my decade of navigating enterprise crises and market pivots somehow didn't qualify me. They weren't just ignoring me. They were unmaking me. Each decision chipped away at visibility, credibility, relevance. The worst part? No one else said anything, not out loud. A few younger analysts still shot me sympathetic glances, but they never intervened. They had careers to protect. I didn't blame them. I blamed myself for believing success would make me untouchable. It didn't. I watched my ideas, refined, thoughtful, battle-tested, get dismissed in meetings, only to be repackaged days later under someone else's name. I stopped correcting them. What was the point? They weren't trying to silence me. They were trying to erase me, systematically, thoroughly. And still, I smiled. Still, I showed up. Still, I played the part. Because while they worked so hard to make me invisible, they forgot the most dangerous truth of all. You can't erase someone who's already building a new stage behind the curtain. And Gulen was almost ready. It wasn't the strategy meetings or the demotions that broke me. It was the coffee. Every day for nearly 4 years, Daniel and I had a ritual. At exactly 10:15 a.m., he'd send a single emoji, and I'd already be standing up from my desk. 2 cappuccinos from the cafe on the ground floor, one dusted with cinnamon, mine, one flooded with sugar, his. It wasn't just about caffeine, it was about rhythm, safety, sanity. We called it our escape hatch. 5 floors below the politics and power games, we'd sit on the stone bench under the birch trees, watching pigeons fight over muffin crumbs. Some days we barely spoke. Other days, we talked about everything. His frustrations with Carter's micromanagement, my insomnia, the novel he was writing in secret, the startup I dreamed of launching. When my mother was in the hospital last year, Daniel was the only person who didn't try to make it about productivity. He just handed me my coffee and said, "It's okay not to pretend today." That was enough. But on Thursday, Daniel didn't show. At first, I thought he was just tied up in a client call or buried under deliverables. I waited 10 minutes, then 15. Finally, I went downstairs alone, bought both cappuccinos like always, and stood under the birch trees, our bench half in shadow. At 10:36, I texted him. "Me. Hey, you stuck in something? Got your usual." No response. At 11:02, the screen lit up. Daniel. "I'm sorry, I can't. Not today. Probably not for a while. I felt it immediately, that hollowness that settles somewhere between your chest and your throat. I stared at the message, rereading it 3 times before typing. Me. Everything okay? 3 dots. Then nothing. Then, finally, Daniel. It's not personal, but I need to stay clear. Just so I'm not taking sides. Sides. The word hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just a message. It was a border being drawn in real time. Daniel, my anchor, my person, was telling me that proximity to me had become a risk, that I was now radioactive, a problem. I didn't reply. What could I possibly say? Thanks for the honesty? I get it. See you around? Instead, I placed his coffee on the stone ledge of our bench, still warm, still too sweet. I stood there for a moment, watching the cinnamon foam on mine swirl like it was trying to disappear. And then I walked away. The office felt different when I returned, sharper, like everyone could sense something had shifted. I passed Carter in the hallway. He didn't acknowledge me. Sabrina brushed by in a conference room, laughing too loudly, her gaze skipping over me like I was a ghost. At my desk, someone had moved the seating chart for next week's leadership summit. My name wasn't on it. No coffee, no invitation, no explanation, just silence. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen. My inbox was mostly quiet, only system notifications and a few irrelevant CCs. The team I used to lead was already being rerouted through a junior manager who still asked me how to access shared drives. And Daniel, he was gone too. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was worse. I understood. Fear doesn't just strip loyalty. It rewires memory. It makes good people rewrite history to protect themselves. Daniel wasn't the first to step back. He was just the last one close enough to hurt. The realization settled in with the weight of a final puzzle piece. I was alone. Not metaphorically, not romantically, strategically. No allies, no backup, no safety net. I was the threat now. They didn't want to see me. They wanted to erase me, professionally and personally. But what they hadn't realized was that while they'd spent the past 2 weeks trying to isolate me, I had been building something more powerful than proximity. Gulen was operational, tested, untethered. And now, with nothing left to lose, I could do the one thing they never saw coming. Act. The email came at 3:14 p.m. I was halfway through updating Gulen's data integrity firewall when the notification blinked across my screen. Subject: Follow-up, documentation attached. From Elisa Henderson, HR Operations Elisa. Sweet, nervous, still too new to lie convincingly Elisa. I clicked it, expecting some benign HR paperwork, or maybe another vague process alignment memo. But it wasn't that. It was a PDF. Title: Separation Summary, Isabella Clarke. I didn't move. Just sat there, index finger still resting on the trackpad, eyes locked on the document icon like it might bite. I double-clicked. The file opened with sterile, familiar formatting. Elixis letterhead, HR header, my full name. And a date. 2 weeks ago, 3 days before the award ceremony. I read the sentence once, then again. As part of Elixis's ongoing restructuring efforts, Isabella Clarke's position will be formally dissolved effective June 10th. Public recognition will proceed as scheduled to ensure brand cohesion. Brand cohesion. I exhaled, long and slow. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was premeditated theater. They hadn't just planned to fire me. They had choreographed it, scheduled it, dressed it in applause and flowers. They knew they were discarding me before they handed me that glass trophy, before they sent out the press release, before Carter whispered congratulations in my ear with that fake warmth I now understood as pure calculation. Elisa had sent it by mistake, probably meant to attach a benefit summary or another document with a similar file name. She hadn't written this. She was just the messenger, or maybe the pawn, and I was no longer angry, not even a little. What I felt now was something colder, sharper, a focus so clean it bordered on serenity. They wanted to dissolve me like I was a line item. They wanted the public to see a graceful exit, while they buried the truth in sanitized footnotes. But now I had proof. A time-stamped, signed, premeditated execution of my career, and they'd sent it to me themselves. I archived the email, saved the document to Goulin's encrypted storage, then returned to my work without missing a beat. Because this wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the start of the final phase, the trigger I'd been waiting for. They thought this was about reputation, about titles, about keeping the machinery of Elixis running smoothly. But they forgot who built the machinery in the first place. And soon, very soon, they would remember. Not when I shouted, not when I slammed doors, but when the lights flickered and the dashboard stopped responding and the silence turned into something too loud to ignore. They wanted me quiet. They're going to get it. But not the way they think. By Monday morning, the Elixis office buzzed with its usual artificial calm, forced smiles, click-clacking keyboards, the low hum of filtered air and filtered ambition. But beneath the surface, I was already gone. Not in body, in intention. Because something shifted the moment I opened that mistaken email from Elisa. It wasn't just betrayal. It was liberation. There was nothing left to salvage here, and I didn't want to. It was time to build something else. I just needed one door. One quiet exit from the maze I helped design. That door had a name, Jordan Kessler. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Back when I was still pretending Elixis was my future, Jordan had been one of our most progressive clients, quirky, demanding, brilliant. At the time, he was COO of a mid-sized logistics firm, and I'd helped overhaul their forecasting algorithms in half the time the board expected. We clicked instantly. Same language, same tempo, same restless hunger for better. 2 months ago, I heard he'd left his old job and launched something new. Normix, a lean, agile consulting firm built on transparency and innovation. They were small but fast-growing, already rumored to be circling 3 Fortune 500 contracts. I didn't hesitate. That afternoon, I sent him a message, not through LinkedIn or my Elixis email, through my personal encrypted channel. One sentence. Jordan, I have something you'll want to see. Clean, fast, independent. Built for the future, not the past. Can we talk? He replied within 2 hours. Wednesday, noon, send the deck, NDA not needed. He remembered. I smiled, not because it was easy, but because it had finally begun. That night, I stayed late in my apartment, hunched over my battered laptop, fine-tuning Goulin's pitch deck. I stripped the language of buzzwords. This wasn't about selling shiny features. It was about solving real pain. I framed the system like a compass for companies drowning in data, but starving for insight. No dependencies, no legacy lag, just speed, clarity, and resilience. Highlights: independent architecture with zero tether to Elixis platforms, full transparency modules and real-time audit logs, adaptive algorithms tuned to client behavior instead of market noise, security-first design with built-in breach detection, a modular build for seamless vertical scaling. But the real jewel? Goulin didn't just analyze patterns. It adapted to them, evolving in real time. No manual updates, no downtime. I included a case simulation using Elixis's own historical data, stripped of branding, anonymized. The results were striking: 38% faster processing, 22% improvement in forecasting precision, and 0% vendor lock-in. By 3:17 a.m., the deck was done. And it was good. Not flashy, not arrogant, just undeniable. On Tuesday, I cleared out the last of my personal files from the Elixis server, quietly, no traces, no noise. I began transferring select assets into Goulin's ecosystem, all original work, all legally mine, everything I had been building in the margins of my real job, preparing for a day I hadn't been able to name, until now. The transition had started. I could feel it in the way I walked into the building the next morning. Shoulders lighter, breath slower. I still wore the badge, still took the meetings, still nodded in hallways. But I was no longer playing their game. They'd staged my exit. Now I was scripting my rebirth. It was almost too easy. Buried inside the original architecture agreement for Elixis's predictive platform, right between the innocuous legal boilerplate and the footnotes no one ever reads, was a clause I had inserted during a 2 a.m. drafting session, long before the billion-dollar contracts, long before the strategy awards and executive betrayals. Clause 17b, Intellectual Framework Ownership and Operational Rights. All algorithmic frameworks, adaptive modules, and forecasting sequences developed by Isabella Clarke are the sole intellectual property of the creator. Usage is licensed to Elixis exclusively under her supervision. Termination of her employment, for any reason, voids said license unless renegotiated with written consent. At the time, no one questioned it. Legal barely blinked. My boss had been so eager to push the new system live, he probably assumed it was technical fluff. After all, I was just the architect, right? Not someone with leverage. They were wrong. And now, with that unsigned dismissal document in my possession, Clause 17b was no longer a hypothetical safeguard. It was a trigger. By Thursday morning, the system was still running. Elixis's internal dashboards glowed green. KPIs projected calm. But none of them knew the legal framework holding it all together was already cracking. I printed Clause 17b, highlighted the key terms, and walked, calmly, deliberately, into Carter's office. He didn't look up from his laptop. "I need 5 minutes," I said. "You'll have to schedule through Sabrina," he replied without looking. I slid the paper onto his desk. He didn't read it at first, just glanced up, clearly irritated. Then his eyes dropped to the page and froze. I didn't say anything. I waited. His expression shifted slowly, from confusion to dawning dread. "This can't be right," he muttered. "It is," I said quietly. "It's been part of my contract since deployment. You signed off on it." He reached for his keyboard, already pulling up internal files. Legal never flagged. "They didn't read it," I said, not closely, "and neither did you." He looked at me, jaw tight. "You're bluffing." I leaned forward. "If you terminate me," I said, "you lose the system. Gulen is mine. You have no right to operate it without me, and I have no intention of licensing it to a company that built a conspiracy around erasing me." I stood, letting the silence sink in. "I just wanted you to know, officially." By that afternoon, HR called me in. This time, Elisa couldn't look me in the eye. "We've reviewed Clause 17b, she said quietly. "And after legal consultation, we'd like to confirm. Elixis wishes to retain the platform under your ongoing supervision." I nodded, expression neutral. "Of course you do." What they didn't understand, what they never had, was that power isn't always loud. It's not always tied to title or desk placement or access to meetings. Sometimes, power is built quietly, in clauses and code and conviction. And now, they were bound by all three. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. Elixis Annual Visionary Awards Gala, formal attire, red carpet. A private table reserved for executive leadership and distinguished contributors. My name, Bella Clarke, was printed in elegant script on the seat assignment. It would have felt like an honor if I hadn't already seen the script. They were dressing it up, making it grand, but it was just the final act of their little show. A clean farewell for the shareholders. A spotlight send-off to keep their hands clean while they pushed me out the side door. But this time, I wasn't walking in blind. I knew it was a trap. The moment I saw the invite, I knew they had decided to go through with the plan, Clause 17b or not. They were arrogant enough to think they could still spin this, that they could force my hand under pressure or negotiate after the cameras stopped flashing. They underestimated how far I'd already moved beyond them. Still, I RSVP'd. Looking forward to celebrating, I typed, and I meant it. Not their success. Mine. When I arrived, the ballroom glowed with soft light, champagne towers, and artificial smiles. Everyone was dressed like they'd stepped out of a corporate fairy tale. High heels, sleek tuxes, rehearsed laughs. Sabrina wore deep green satin. Carter looked like someone had replaced his usual scowl with a salesman's grin. They greeted me as if none of the past month had happened. "Bella! Radiant as always!" Sabrina cooed, kissing the air beside my cheek. "We're so proud of what you've done," Carter said, pressing a too-firm hand against my back. I smiled back, perfectly. Then, just before I reached the green room where nominees waited before going on stage, someone from HR, someone I didn't even know, slipped me a thick envelope. "Per protocol," she whispered, "please review before your segment." I didn't need to open it. I already knew. Inside were my dismissal papers, signed, dated, effective immediately, after the ceremony. A controlled execution masked as celebration. I stepped onto the stage 20 minutes later, spotlights soft and golden, applause echoing through the high ceiling. The host's voice boomed. "This year's Visionary Award goes to the architect behind our most successful initiative to date, the brilliant, unstoppable Isabella Clarke." People stood. They clapped. A photographer's flash captured my expression, composed, gracious, powerful. I took the mic. I gave the speech I had rehearsed, not in the mirror, but in silence, walking the streets at night when I couldn't sleep. I thanked the team, praised innovation, spoke of the future with such precision, even I almost believed the illusion. But every sentence was a note in a goodbye song only I could hear. I accepted the award with both hands. I smiled into the cameras. I let them see what they wanted to see, a woman honored, humbled, moved, but beneath the gloss, beneath the perfect lipstick and careful lighting and poised posture, I had already pressed start. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I opened my laptop. Gulen was already live, fully migrated, secured, versioned. The Access Audit Trail showed the first triggered response. The auto-detachment protocol had activated. All Elixir systems that relied on my framework were now in passive mode, still functioning, but only just. A hollow engine about to stall. Their elegant dismissal had lit the fuse, and the countdown had begun. They thought they could rebuild it. After the ceremony, after the applause faded, and I walked off that stage with a smile stretched like porcelain over steel, they moved fast. Within 48 hours, internal teams were reassigned. Carter approved a rapid replication initiative. Sabrina brought in 2 external contractors, supposedly elite system architects. The order was clear. Rebuild Bella's platform without Bella. But they didn't understand what Gulen really was. They thought it was just code, a smart framework, something that could be reverse-engineered and polished for continuity. They didn't realize the heart of Gulen wasn't in its structure, it was in its consciousness. And they triggered the one thing they never thought I was capable of planning, the failsafe. At 7:12 a.m. on Monday, a junior engineer tried to run a partial compile of a stripped-down version of the platform. The system recognized the breach instantly, not just the code being accessed, but the intention behind it. Instead of replicating, Gulen executed a command, a script, not destructive, not malicious, just truthful. One by one, files began unlocking. Logs, emails, internal chats, project audits, performance manipulation records. Every lie, every betrayal, every ghost-written executive memo, it was all cataloged, tied to user credentials, time-stamped, verified. And then, precisely at 7:26 a.m., the real heart of the system activated. Subject: Violation report. Unauthorized replication attempt. Recipients: U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Normix Legal Department Business Ethics Desk, Global Financial Times. 3 top-tier clients under contract, and 1 email marked simply, press@truthwire.com. It was automatic, unstoppable, and undeniable. By noon, the fallout began. The first article hit the press. $950 million. Deal compromised by internal fraud allegations at Elixis. By 3 p.m., Normix issued a public withdrawal of interest, citing ethics breaches and leadership instability. The deal was dead. By 4 p.m., Elixis stock began to drop, 11%, then 19%, then 27%. Traders panicked. Investors demanded answers. And the board? They moved fast. Sabrina resigned first. Her public statement was full of vague language about stepping aside for reflection. Carter followed, but not before trying to spin the narrative as a disruption in innovation infrastructure. It didn't work, because the documents weren't anonymous. They weren't hearsay. They were exact. Elixis didn't fall because of sabotage. It fell because of exposure. By 9 p.m., the company's homepage had been replaced with a temporary statement from the legal team. We are cooperating fully with investigations and taking immediate steps to address the serious issues raised. And I watched it all from my living room, a cup of tea cooling beside me, the soft hum of Goulin's back-end server running clean and bright on my screen. No revenge, no gloating, just truth, delivered without emotion, without cruelty, because this was never about punishment. It was about freedom. The next morning, my phone buzzed. Jordan Kessler, Normix. We're ready when you are. Let's build something real. I smiled. Finally, it was quiet. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. Not because they were gone, but because I was.